More than 158 million people here in the United States were just hit with some very bad news. And you are likely one of those people. So first off, I just want to say I'm sorry. But here's what I can tell you. Inflation is currently at 7.7% as of shooting this video. But the expectations is that we are going to see rising interest rates, demand destruction, and with both of those, we should see inflation drop. That's actually considered really good news. But you know what else is dropping? The expectation of 158 million working Americans. Yeah. What we're being told is right now that those people that are expecting a 5.5% pay increase to start 2023, well, that's likely not going to happen. Now, it is clear that with the United States economy headed towards a deeper downturn, the likelihood of a 5.5% pay increase is very small. But I was curious how many employers would actually give out a raise. So I asked some of my friends who actually own businesses or manage a business, and I want to explain what they said. But first, I want to address one thing. I talked about this before, that right now there's still a little bit of leverage that employees have. Now, it's not in every industry. In certain industries, employers don't have any leverage, and the employee does. But for the majority of Americans, the employer holds all the power at this time. Now, let's address what some of my friends said regarding a potential pay increase starting in 2023. Well, I have a friend who is a manager of a JCPenney store. They're a retail clothing store. You've probably been to one before. And they are currently struggling. He said, yes, we will give a wage increase to certain employees, but it won't be much. Probably around 2%. It won't keep up with inflation. And in all seriousness, though, it is more likely one of my employees is laid off, not given a raise. Now, that's very concerning, because he's not the only one that I've heard say that. Now, for today's video, I'm only going to reference 3 people that I talked to, 3 of my friends. But in the past, I've heard people talk about this. That own trucking companies. They were going to lay off employees starting in 2023 if we didn't see demand really turn around. I also talked to people that owned other businesses. Some of them were in technology, online businesses as well. That's where the majority of my friends actually work. We do a lot of e-commerce and stuff like that. So we do have a pretty large network. But the majority of people said, yeah, they're not going to give a raise. They're actually going to be laying people off. So again, it's very concerning. And to hear another person say that, yeah, it's a little bit tough to hear. I also talked to somebody else who owns a fairly large construction business. They said, a raise? Yeah, right. At this point, we are just trying to keep our entire crew working. I have already had to let go of 5% of my staff. I had to limit hours, and I unfortunately can't pay holidays anymore. And even I myself have to jump in with the crews now, as we are seeing demand for our services fall. So again, this is in the construction business, right? Construction industry, where and this is where I've talked about this in the past, where construction is going to get hit, lending is going to get hit, and we are going to see this really collapse because of a couple things. One, when people are not buying homes because the interest rate is rising, guess what happens? People aren't buying homes, so that means the seller of the homes that are out there, chances are they're not going to go and do any fixes, any renovations. So you know who that hurts? That hurts construction crews. That hurts hardware stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that. So as an investor, that's what I'm looking at as well, is what are the signs for stores like Home Depot and Lowe's, and are construction crews going to get hit? In this case, yes. And for my friend here, he has to jump in with the crews now because the demand for the services are falling, so he can't afford to pay others to do the work. He actually has to do it himself. So you can kind of see what's going on there. And then one of my other friends, He says, I won't be giving out any additional raises next year. I gave every one of my employees a 10% raise back in September, and I told them not to expect another one until things rebound. But here's my thought process. My thought was that the business made so much money the past 2 years that I could withstand a setback even if it lasted a year. Now, this friend of mine, he owns a fairly large landscaping company in Oregon. Now, this is not common. This was common in the technology sector, a couple years ago. This isn't commonplace now, where a business, an employer will give you a substantial raise like 10% and is going to take on a loss, even if it takes a year. But he wanted to make sure his employees were set, that they didn't go anywhere. And so he gave them a 10% raise. So don't expect a 10% raise. I just wanted to kind of toss this one in there because I thought this was interesting, that he had a different mindset, different way of thinking. So again, we will see. But one thing I do know, and this is something that I cautioned him on, is it could potentially take a year. But if we see we go into a recession or even a depression over the next year, because technically we're not in a recession, but really I feel like we are. If this is a case, he could take this setback for longer than a year. And again, he's in the landscaping business. So the problem with that is many people might not be hiring a landscaper. They may be doing all the work themselves. So they're not paying $50 or $100 a week to get their lawn trimmed and the edges cleaned up and any weeds pulled or anything like that. So this is something that he's gonna have to keep an eye on. Now, as we get closer and closer into 2023, it's actually becoming more and more clear that wage increases are not likely for millions and millions of Americans. And getting an increase equivalent to inflation is almost unheard of at this time. The truth is that workers that right now, you just don't have the power that they once did. Now, I remember back in the spring of 2022, this is probably the last time I mentioned this, but I told people to negotiate their wages. Negotiate your wages. Make sure you're getting paid the most money possible. Take on another responsibility if it means you can get an increase in your salary. And I said this because if you wait, which I know a lot of people did, told them don't wait, don't push the envelope, because the power is going to go back into the employer's hands. And guess what? It did. It has done so over the past few months. And again, I've said this probably back in August, was what we are seeing is a major shift. From August to September, we saw a huge shift where the employee lost power and the employer gained it back. That's kind of what we're seeing now, but the more power is going to the employer. So again, if you didn't increase your salary over the past 6 months, chances are you lost all the leverage that you once had. So just wanted to fill you in on what's going on, because again, this is potentially bad news for about 158 million Americans. As they go into 2023, they may not see a pay increase. And again, if we see inflation stick around and it's up 7 to 8% for the next 6 months, that could be bad news for millions of people that are only going to get a pay increase of possibly 0 to potentially 3.5%. So we'll see what happens there. But as always, as I know more, I promise I'll come back on and share all the latest news and updates. Again, just want to thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.